Yo guys, what's up? Ben Ababi here and welcome back to the 12th episode of A Road Back to High Stakes. So as you can see, we're in a completely different setup today. We are finally in London and I've been here for just over 2 weeks now. And needless to say, the journey from Australia, which was about 36 or 37 hours, was pretty damn savage. And it took me a good few days to get over the jet lag. Since then, I've pretty much been catching up with friends and family. I actually played a 5p, 10p home game up in Birmingham with a few friends, which was very fun and obviously got pretty out of hand as always with these home games. Other than that, I did have a setup organized for when I arrived, and that was the new laptop as well as a dual monitor. This is the setup here. But to be honest with you, in practice, the setup just was not up to scratch. The recording quality was awful. The lobbies were really, really small. The quality of the screens was not that great. And overall, it just made for a very, very poor grinding / recording experience. Since then, let's say I have upgraded my setup to this one, which to be honest with you is a lot better than it was before, but still doesn't kind of touch the surface in relation to my setup in Australia. So the reason there wasn't a video last week, other than the fact I'm a massive boomer, is that I just couldn't get the settings right for the recording on OBS and also the output files and that kind of thing. But now we do have everything set up, so hopefully we will have more videos in weeks to come. So with that in mind, this week is going to be a little bit of a different setup. I played a live 2 5-10 and a 5-10 £25 in the Victoria Casino as well. However, this week we're going to be doing a bit of a mishmash of online and live as a way of kind of bringing a bit more of a vlog to you guys because we haven't put one out for a couple of weeks. And that's going to include a couple of online hands as well as a few live hands as well. But before we get on into the hands, let's take a quick look at the graph since I've been in London. So as you can see, we lost about 8k so far this month, and actually we've had 13 out of 14 losing or break-even days, which is never fun, but also having that many losing days and only losing 8 buy-ins is actually a kind of win in my books. I don't know what you guys think about that, but for me it feels pretty good. Overall, I think that in that first week I didn't play my best. I had loads of jet lag and I pretty much just wasn't able to find my A game, and also I was on the brand new setup. But in the last couple of sessions I really feel like I've been able to settle back into my best kind of play, and I'm really hoping to have a very strong end to the month. The only thing I would mention is that the time zone in the UK and the early morning grind, which is what I'm doing, isn't the best in terms of games or options to be playing. So I'm kind of open sitting a few games, trying to get a bit of 500 zoom going, playing a bit more ACR reg battling, and then obviously finding the odd game at GG 1K. To be honest with you, I'm very interested to see what the next few months brings, but time will tell on that front. So that's going to do it for the graph, and let's get straight on into today's hands. So the first 2 hands today are both online hands, and they are versus the same very good high stakes reg on ACR. In both spots, they're 15 minutes apart. I check raise the big blind in a single raise pot, barrel the turn and shove the river, and hopefully we can make them fold in at least one of them. The other hands are all going to be coming from my live session at the Vic. There's going to be between 4 and 5 hands. I haven't quite decided yet, so I hope you enjoy. And in the first hand today, we have got 4 deuce of diamonds in the big blind, and we get open from a very good high stakes reg on the button. This reg has played the Doug Polk challenge, I believe, heads up, and also is just battling all day, every day, heads up, and 3-handed and 4-handed at 5k, 10k, 20k it seems. So needless to say, I imagine that they're going to have at least some kind of decent edge on me. They start out with a small bet on ace 7-4, and I decide that I'm going to mix between call and raise. I think that it makes a lot more sense to raise a hand like 4-3 before this one, but I don't feel that strongly either way. I think this hand is still going to raise sometimes, so I decide to play relatively theory against a player that I know is competent. I don't really want to get in an exploit war against this player type because I think that they probably are just going to come out on top if I start doing that. So I'm going to err on the side of theory for the most part. We see a 5 of hearts, which is an extremely good card for the out of position range. On the 5 of hearts specifically, we are just going to make so many more good hands than in position here. We're going to have a bunch of 2 pairs now. We're going to have a load of straight. 3 as well as 8-6, and also deuce 3 as well. So yeah, we just have an abundance of value. I think the optimal sizing scheme on the turn here is going to be mixed between 2/3 and overbet, but I'm going to be using a single sizing approach, and I think I'm just going to be using a big sizing. I don't want to go too big here because the board doesn't really warrant an overbet. I think the imposition is still going to have a decent amount of 8-6 suited themselves. And I've talked about this in the past, that when there's more of a symmetry in the nuts, then you generally are not really going overbet as you're single sizing. You're kind of usually capping out at around pot. So I do decide to bet my every single time on the turn, as I'm going to do with pretty much all of the hands that I have chosen to check raise the flop with. Villain calls, and we see the 9 of hearts on the river completing the backdoor flush. Really interesting card here. So we need to consider our sizing scheme, and I'm definitely going to be using a small bet sizing, and that's going to be for like a bunch of 2 pairs that have now been downgraded on the 9 of hearts. The other sizing I want to use is probably optimally going to be 2/3, but I am going to arrive here with like a bunch of very, very good hands. I'm going to have plenty of flushes here, and I want to be shoving at least some of those at least some of the time. So I'm going to be using block and all in. Now, to my combo, I actually think in hindsight, I would much rather have seen myself block my combo. The reason for that is that I just do a terrible job of blocking the value from imposition here. And I think that my block sizing achieves just like a bunch of random ace-x's with no heart that may well fold. A hand like maybe even like an ace-6 or something like that might fold on the river. So I would have liked to see myself go block. Unfortunately, I do not go block, and I decide to go with the all-in sizing. For what it's worth, I definitely don't think all in with my hand is bad by any means. I just think small is probably better. Villain in position doesn't snap call, which is great news, but long tanks and makes a sick hero call with ace-6 suited. It's very fair to say in position has very likely got a pure fold in theory here, and I don't really think we need to argue that. However, in position called on the river, and I am over bluffing. So without being too results oriented, I think that this is a really good example that I don't want to get into an exploit war versus a player like this. However, I do feel like I've over bluffed the river, and in position has called a combo that ordinarily shouldn't call and has potentially exploited me straight off the rip. Just a very, very, very nice hand to my opponent, and to be honest with you, we just got pretty destroyed in this spot. And this next hand comes just 15 minutes later, about 4 or 5 orbits later, and we got ace-5 offsuit in the big blind versus the exact same player. They go ahead and open to 48, and we have a little bit of 3-bet and quite a lot of call in the big blind, and this time we do call. We see Jack 7-3 rainbow, and we have got like a double pretender backdoor flush draw, and villain starts out with a small bet. I think on a site like GG, where rake is really high, we just want to be pure folding this combo on the flop. Maybe you could sprinkle in a little bit of raise, but to be honest with you, just folding seems like the right play. ACR has much lower rake, and I think that we're just going to be getting to continue a lot wider. And particularly with a combo like this versus, again, a competent player, I am going to be trying to play as close to theory as possible. So I do decide to mix raise, call, and fold on the flop. But to be honest with you, you don't have to do that. You could just fold, or you could just call. It just doesn't make a difference, really. Unfortunately, or should I say fortunately for me, I do roll the raise this time, and we do just that. We see another range hitting card for us in the 6 of spades, and now we need to choose our bet sizing scheme. So similar to the last hand, we definitely want to be developing big sizes here, but in the last hand I said that I just wanted to cap my sizing out at around pot. I think this spot is quite a lot different, and the reason for that is that as OOP, we just arrive with way, way, way more nut than in position. I know on the other hand, we also did have the 6-3 as well as the 8-6, but the 8-6 are no offsuit combos, whereas in this situation, there is so much 5-4 offsuit for the out of position player when there is none for the in position player. When that happens, we generally just get to leverage that advantage, and we just get to use a very big sizing. I think with my specific suit on this specific turn, I'm just going to always bet the turn for overbet, particularly when I've only rolled a very low frequency flop check raise of around 20%. The river's a 9 of diamonds, and now we have a important decision point. So I think the first thing to say is if my suits were flipped and I had the ace of spades, I would just never ever bluff here. I think it's just a very, very clear give up because we want in position to have those nut flush draws that call the flop, call the turn, and then fold the river. The other thing to mention is that we do block pocket aces, and that is definitely a hand that we want in position to have that folds. That said, there are just a load of other hands that are just going to fold the river. Loads of jack X, especially with jack X of spades, other flush draws as well, and obviously we just unblock those, so we do have a reasonable assumption that in position is going to be folding a decent amount on the river. And unlike the other hand where I was bluffing a pair, I think this is probably a situation where we just want to unblock the pairs, again for the spade reasons, like we want in position to have like the king three of spades and that kind of thing as well. So all things considered, I decided I'm just going to bluff my every single time, again because I haven't arrived here that frequently after my flop raise, but by the time I do pure barrel the turn with my suit, I think we just have a very natural follow through on the river. So I just do exactly that for just over pot. And yet again, we get turbo snapped by top two pair on the flop, which is definitely not going to fold. So nice hand to them. So that's going to do it for the two online hands. Let's now get straight on into the live session that I played at the Vic. Our first hand comes just 2 orbits into the live session in a 2-5-10 game, and we are in the £10 straddle. We're getting open from a guy who was talking about wanting to play 2,000, 4,000 PLO. Not sure why that conversation was happening, but this player did not seem to be a reg, but clearly an aspiring high-stakes PLO player. The flop comes a beautiful 9-7-6 with a flush draw, and we check it on over, and they go ahead and bet £35 into around 60. We obviously go ahead and check raise to £110, and Villain then thinks very strongly about 3-betting the flop. This is very interesting to note. I don't really imagine that 3-bets on this flop in a live setting after half pot is going to be much worse than pocket sevens, but they do elect to end up just calling. The turn is now a 3 of hearts completing the flop flush. I'm feeling pretty good about the fact that they wanted to 3-bet the flop because I don't expect a player intuitively to want to 3-bet the flop with a flush draw when they can just call and realize their equity. Anyway, I do decide to bet 1/3 pot on the turn, which I think is just pretty standard. I definitely don't want to check my hand and give free cards either. They look way less interested in raising this time, and they do just call. River is now a disgraceful offsuit 8, putting a 4 straight, and obviously the flush was completed on the turn. The fact that in position considered 3-betting the flop and then only called the turn leads me to believe that it's very likely to be an overpair and probably never a flush. That said, it's going to be extremely hard to get paid, especially when in position is now just going to snap check back all of those combos, apart from the exact combo of pocket 10s, obviously. With all that in mind, I decide to put out a very small bet of 10% pot and just try and get a crying call from an overpair. Villain looks very, very, very unhappy with the situation and tanks for a good couple minutes before finally making the call and me realizing that I have won max value, but also kind of min value because they do flip over the underset on the flop, which is pocket 6s. The next hand comes from the 5-10-25 game. We left the 2-5-10 game up about £650 after probably about an hour, just kind of chipping away in very small pots and running pretty well in those. In the second hand of this new table, we pick up red 4s in the small blind and we open to £75. Gazzy 3-bets the big blind to £225. Now, I've got to give a disclaimer here. I have absolutely no idea how straddle ranges work for the most part. So I'm just assuming that given we're around a bit over 100 straddles deep with Gazzy, he's probably going to be 3-betting somewhere close to the online big blind 3-bet ranges. Maybe that assumption's wrong, but that's kind of what I was going with at the time. We do see Jack 8-6 with 2 diamonds on the flop, and we check it on over to Gazzy. We're expecting to see checks and half pots here, but curiously, Gazzy does choose to go small on the flop. And I think ordinarily here versus half pot, we have a pretty clear mix between all 3 options here. Mostly fold, I would probably say. When Gazzy goes small, I think that shifts very much towards pure continue, and I'm going to raise and I'm going to call with that in mind. Even though I want to mix, I don't really know how to use an RNG live. So I looked up to the clock hoping to find a way of RNGing and was disappointed in the fact that I didn't really have any plan before I looked at the clock. So I decide to err on the side of nittiness and just call the flop and save myself any more embarrassment. We see an offsuit king on the turn, which is obviously a terrible card for my range. And when we check and Gazzy fires out again, I do just snap fold. And in a shocking turn of events, Gazzy's very small sizing on the flop was, of course, pocket jacks. And that brings us on to the last hand of the session, just before my phone ran out of battery. So we get an open from the cutoff, who was an extremely aggressive reg, and we get a call from someone who was way more aggressive than the cutoff reg. This player was willing to put their stack in constantly, max pressure every single spot, and just generally completely fearless. Someone I would probably not want to play every day in the Vic, if I'm being honest with you. When they cold call the small blind, I have Jack 7 of clubs in the big blind, and I'm naturally just going to always call my combo. We go 3 ways to 6-4-3 with 2 spades and a diamond. Curiously now, the very aggressive small blind reg decides to lead. If I'm honest with you, I'm not overly surprised to see them lead this spot, although I do think that this is just not a spot that the small blind gets to lead, given how densely low card heavy the big blind is and how well they hit this board. I just have way more nuts here than the small blind ever can. I just don't think the small blind's ever going to be cold calling hands like 5-7 suited or deuce 5 suited, for example. Either way, when they do lead out for 1/3 pot, I think this is kind of close in some ways. I did look over to the cutoff and they didn't seem that interested in the pot, so I did think that calling and seeing a turn was probably just going to be okay with my overs and my gut shot. So now that I do call, the cutoff clearly now is kind of interested because they come along as well. I give the cutoff pretty much no good hands here, to be honest with you. It just seemed like it was just like a 2 over kind of float. I mean, maybe it was a hand like 8, but I just think they probably consider raising or something like that. I'm pretty much seeing their money is relatively dead in the pot at this point though. We see a 3 on the turn, pair in the bottom card, and it checks to me. I have a significant more amount of 3x, but also I'm a little bit unsure what the small blind's up to here, and I think checking is pretty much going to be the standard option, especially with a player in position still. When the in-position player very quickly checks back, I think the story checks out about our read on the strength of their hand. Now the river is a very interesting 6 pairing the top card. Small blind thinks about it for a little bit and then ends up checking to me. I think it's just very obvious that when we're in the straddle here, we just have an absolute plethora of 6x. We're just going to have so many offsuit 6x combos that are going to call the flop, they're always going to check the turn, and then we're going to arrive with boats on the river. Small blind probably has a little bit more 6x than they're probably meant to, given the player profile, and I think cutoff maybe has a very small amount, but I do think cutoff does think about betting the turn at least some of the time as well. All that in mind, I'm pretty much only going to be betting boats, and I'm only going to be repping boats, and I want my bet sizing to reflect that. So I decide to pot the river for around £350. Cutoff is very quick to fold their hand. Small blind seems a little bit more reluctant to fold their hand, but eventually does fold as well. And that brings us to the end of the session, and we finished the day at around plus £600 or £700. So that's going to do it for the hand and the video today. Thank you again for watching, and if you like this format or you have any thoughts or feedback on the format, definitely let me know in the comments below. But until next time, take care, and I'll see you at the tables.